Good afternoon, folks. Indy Truck Davey out the truck and at home in his office in Salisbury, North Lanarkshire, where it is overcast, 15 degrees, no bad for this time of year. That's the weather forecast for Salisbury, North Lanarkshire. You want to know what the weather's like where you are? Look out your rain, bloody windy. Now, I was on to talk about the Rutherglen and Hamilton West by-election loss for the SNP just a couple of minutes ago. I've since had a look through the mainstream media, and every one of them is trumpeting that the Labour Party will take 40 plus seats at the next general election. Well, I'm sorry, folks. This is lies, spins and propaganda. Why is it lies, spins and propaganda? Because the last two polls for the general election next year have the SNP on a 9-point lead over Labour and the SNP on an 11-point over Labour. Now, but just as some spanner on my timeline, what's his name? John Stewart. And this is what John Stewart had to say, but let's face it, he's a union no very bright. Well done to the people of Rutherglen and Hamilton North for rejecting division and the SNP. Scottish independence is dead and Labour is back as a force in Scotland. Okay, I wanted Scottish Conservatives to win, but I'll settle with Labour. We voted no to independence. Please respect it. Respected my arse, John Stewart, whoever you're, you spanner. I don't even know where you came from. But here's the truth to it, folks, okay? Just for John Stewart and the mainstream media who are talking absolute pish today, I'll put the polls up, shall I? Let's put them up. The latest two polls was by Opinion, and that was in the 5th to the 14th of September 2023. And the SNP, if you have a look along, you see the parties SNP, Con, Labour, Lib Dems, Greens and others. And the very latest poll that we've got an example of, the SNP are polling at 37% of the vote and the Labour Party on 28% of the vote, giving the SNP a 9% vote lead. That would guarantee the SNP a landslide win in the next general election. Let's go back to the poll before that. 8th to the 13th of September 2023, YouGov, Poll, no friend of the SNP, and it was commissioned by the Times. Sample size was 1,000. SNP lead 38% in the polls. Labour 27% on the polls. SNP lead 11 points. The one before that, we Redfield and Wilton. They're the only ones that don't really use a different form of weighting, and they did the poll themselves. The one they sponsored, and they polled 1,100 people, and they had Labour and the SNP in a tie. And if we have a wee look down the right-hand column, we've had two ties in the last year, according to two polls. But every other poll since then, see, it's all yellow on the very end line, and this goes all the way back to 2019 with 19% poll lead. The polls are narrowing. They are narrowing. I mean, 2022 they had a 24% poll lead. Now the average poll lead's 10 points in front of Labour. So this idea that Labour are back and Labour are a force again in Scottish politics, well, the polling's no showing that. What we do know is that, see, I'll put that back up again. There it's there. What we do know is that the unionist press and the propaganda machine that is the BBC are spinning this as Labour is back. Well, it's no, as I've just pointed out to you. The last two polls gives the SNP a 9-point lead and the SNP 11-point lead. The whole point of what was going on in the Rutherglen and Hamilton by-election, as I pointed out earlier, is that the young didn't get out to vote. They couldn't be bothered. They get into their work, fed their kids, and didn't bother asking down the polling station. There was a 37% turnout. And Labour's vote share went backwards. It went to 18,543 back to 17,843. So they went back 700 votes. And they're back, and that's on the 2019 result. on the 2020 Scottish parliamentary result, Labour lost that seat on 20,000 votes. But today, what you're seeing in the mainstream media is an absolute ignorance, absolute deliberate manipulation of information. Labour now have 2 MPs, 2 in Scotland. That doesn't make them a force in Scottish politics. It doesn't make independence dead. The Tories, well, the Tories lost their they lost their deposit along with the Greens. But it's tactical voting. It's probably got Labour's vote share so high there. Because we've heard Murdo and we've heard Miles Briggs, Murdo the Fund and Miles Briggs both say that their voters were instructed to vote Labour. Which means that Labour didn't really get their own vote out either. Probably Labour would have been round about the same as the SNP actually own vote share if it hadn't been for the Tories voting Labour. There you go. But the facts are, the polls are quite clear. The SNP still have a massive, massive lead over Labour. And say, I'll put it back up again. I'll give you the dates of the last 2 polls and the vote shares that are predicted by these polls. All right. So, as I say, last 2 polls, 5th to the 14th September, opinion, and the client was the Tony Blair Institute. Sample size was of 1,004 people. 37% of them intended to vote SNP, 18% intend to vote Tory, 28% intend to vote Labour, 8% Lib Dem, 4% Greens, 4% others. Whether the Greens will stand in the general election, I'm not sure. The poll before that, 8th to the 13th of September 2023, YouGov, and it was sponsored by the Times newspaper. Neither YouGov nor the Times are friends of the SNP, but their sample size was 1,000. 38% intend to vote SNP, 16% Con, 27% Labour, and that gave the SNP an 11-point lead over Labour. So what you're seeing in the mainstream media right now is bollocks. Labour are no back, and they're no force in Scottish politics. They've got 2 MSPs, and they're still in 3rd place in the Holyrood Parliament. So how one win in a mid-term, where the sitting incumbent government normally takes a kicking? How one win the mid-term, and 2 MPs in Westminster sees Labour back as a major force? What you're seeing is propaganda and spin, folks. Remember what the polling says. Now, the polls have narrowed. In 2019, that was a 24% lead. Depending on who you want to believe, in the last 2 polls, it averages out at a 10-point lead over Labour. That's still a landslide win in the general election for the SNP. But it's a long time to the general election. And you've got this one win for the mainstream media to spin Labour as a major force, even though they're not. So you've got to be on your guard. Get your voter ID sorted out for when this general election comes. Don't know whether it will be in January now, or whether it will be January 25, or whether it will actually be in late October or even spring 2024. Because soon at the conferences, there wasn't calling an election. Because people don't want one. But Labour's vote share, as I pointed out, has actually went backwards. And if it wasn't for tactical voting, they wouldn't have won that seat. Simple as that. The SNP still have a 10-point poll lead over Labour here in Scotland. A 10-point poll lead. That still means a landslide win, provided that doesn't narrow any thinner. But it had narrowed and started to widen again. As I say, yesterday was an example of the incumbent government getting a kicking for the public. That's normal in a mid-term or a by-election, whatever you want to call it. But according to the polls, that seat will swing back to the SNP at a general election. Hamilton, Rutherglen West has always been a swing seat anyway. It's been swinging back and forth all my life between the SNP and Labour. As I say, tactical voting got Labour out of the line this time, but they're shouting on becoming a major force in Scottish politics again. No. They've got 2 MPs, and they're going to look like we lost Hamilton and Rutherglen West, according to the national polling at the general election. But what we're seeing is an example of industrial propaganda for the unionist press. I even read an article saying if this result was to be this, and they were very careful how they worded it. If this result was to be replicated in the general election, Labour would get 42 seats. This result isn't going to be replicated in the general election. There's no poll since 2019 has showed Labour going to win a Scottish or a Scottish election or a Westminster election. Not a single poll. And only twice has it showed a tie. And they were all with a lunatic, Redwood and Wooten, a polling company. The rest of the time, the SNP have had a lead over Labour in the polls when it comes to an actual vote. Remember, yesterday was a by-election or a mid-term if you're an American, and generally the sitting government, and in this case, we're talking about the Holyrood government instead of the Westminster government here in Scotland, took a kicking. The other thing was, as I say, 37% turnout and Tory Labour tactical voting. That's what yesterday's result was about. The tactical voting is something we might have to worry about in the general election. That's for sure. If they get the tactical voting right, they'll win. Provided the votes go in the direction of Labour, then the tactical voting would win. The unionists would win on tactical voting. We have to be straight about that. But we also have to be straight about the fact that Labour's vote sharing Rutherglen and Hamilton West went backwards yesterday. And the real reason why they won the seat was nobody get out to vote. They just didn't get out to vote. You heard me at the end of my programme yesterday asking young people when they get into their work to go down the polling station. They didn't. And believe me, when the stats and breakdown comes out, you'll find the under 45 just didn't bother their arse. Now, when it comes to a general election, the 18 to 25 generally don't, 18 to 35 generally don't bother their arse. And that's down to us to get our young people to vote in the general election. Because as we know, polling consistently shows the young people want it. They want it. 70% of them say they want independence. You're going to have to get off your arse, young people, and go to the polling station. It's a gift we can't give you. We know the way we've brought you up, you're used to sitting about and having everything delivered to your arses by us. But I'm afraid we can't do it for a general election. You have to go out and get it for yourself. So 70% of young people want independence. They're going to have to get off their arse and go to a polling station. Anyway, I just wanted to counter some of the crap propaganda that's going on in the press right now. The SNP for next year's general election has still got a 10-point lead over Labour, and I don't see that 10-point lead narrowing, no matter how much propaganda the press throw at it. The hype about Labour being back and a major force in Scottish politics is bollocks. They now have 2 MPs, and they are still in third place in Holyrood, behind the Tories. They're not a major force, they're a spent force. You see, there were influences on that result yesterday, but the SNP are still on course to win the next general election in Scotland by a landslide. Ignore the mainstream media and start looking for the facts yourself, folks. All this crap about Labour going to become a major force in Scottish politics again. Read the polls. No a single by-election result. Read the polls. As I say, I put it up. Every poll since 2019 is the SNP out in front. And even the latest 2 polls in the month of September, but early in October to get any polling, but in the month of September, the SNP has got a 10-point lead over Labour here in Scotland. So, keep that in mind, folks, when you're listening to the pish that's being spouted by the mainstream media. Anyway, got to go. Have a nice day. Hope that helps you understand that what you're hearing in the mainstream media is propaganda. I've already explained to you in an earlier video that Labour's vote share in that particular constituency went backwards. From 2019 at 18,543 votes to 2023 and 17,843 votes went backwards. The real reason they won was the electorate didn't turn out. Have a nice day.